Get your copy of Layla Ali's book, Reach, by clicking the link in the description. Diego Chico Corrales versus Arturo Thunder Gatti. Let's get into it. I really don't remember if I've done this video previously, but here's a fresh perspective for you on this fight. First off, may these two great legends continue to rest in peace, and I am so grateful for what they contributed to the sport of boxing, and truly honored to get to be a part of this great era. So, Diego Chico Corrales versus Arturo Thunder Gatti. Who wins and why? And let me just say that this fight would have been legendary. This fight has all the action boxing fans could wish for. Neither one of these guys backed down from a challenge, nor did they have any quit in them. This fight will come down to heart and determination. So if you love blood and guts action, this fight is for you. So let's look at the fighters. Arturo Thunder Gatti is best known for his blood and guts style. He's been involved in several wars over the course of his career. And the great trilogy with Irish Mickey Ward is at the top of the list. Gatti had power, a granite chin, and a hard head. I remember Mickey Ward saying in the post-fight interview of the first fight that Gatti must be made of granite. Gatti had one of the biggest hearts in the history of the sport, and the true definition of leaving it all in the ring. Win, lose, or draw, Gatti was coming to fight. And the fans were definitely going to get their money's worth. I could go on and on about his toughness, his grit, his heart, and his determination. But Gatti also had boxing skills. He had good footwork and an underrated jab. He had great power, and the name Thunder served him just right. Now let's move on to Diego Chico Corrales. Chico was a unique fighter from the standpoint that he was a tall fighter and had a long reach for the weight classes he fought in, which gave him a great advantage. He was a bullying pressure fighter and towered over most of his opponents with great power. So with his size, reach, and power, Diego Chico Corrales was a very dangerous fighter. And he seemed to be even more dangerous when he was hurt or in trouble. He's been involved in several legendary fights himself, with the first fight against Castillo being at the top of the list. And he had a good trilogy with Yoel Casamayor as well. So it's safe to say that these guys are definitely cut from the same cloth, and that they will both leave it in the ring. And if you don't have the stomach for blood, bruises, and cuts, then don't tune into this fight. Because these two warriors are going to fight like warriors and nothing less. It's one of those fights to where I truly don't care who the winner is, because the fans are the winners. But the objective of these videos is to pick a winner. So that's what I'm here to do. Gatti has the edge in experience, power. I believe he has the better chin, and he's more seasoned in the ring. But he didn't give very much thought to defense, which makes him vulnerable to an accurate puncher like Chico Corrales. And although Gatti had a granite chin, there's only so many shots you can take from Chico, and he will start to feel the effects of those shots in the later rounds. Diego's advantages is his size and reach, of course. His punches are more accurate. He's better defensively, and he's the overall better fighter. On the downside, Chico didn't have the best chin, which can get him into serious trouble against a power puncher like Gatti. And as I've mentioned before, they both have heart and determination, but Gatti is overflowing with heart and determination and has the potential to outlast Chico. My point is, Chico has the better boxing skills, but Gatti has the bigger heart. Considering the toughness and determination of both of these guys, this has the potential to go to the cards. But the way these guys hit, I wouldn't count on it. The fight is even and can go either way. But it's going to come down to who can break the other guy down. Who can survive the onslaughts and rally back. And who can break the other guy's will. And I think we have to consider their levels of opposition for a second. They both have great resumes and have fought the best of the best. Chico has names on his resume like Floyd Money Mayweather, Acelino Freitas, Jose Luis Castillo, and Yoel Casamayor. And Gatti has names on his resume like Floyd Money Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya, Mickey Ward, and Jesse James Leija, just to name a few. And although they both fought the cream of the crop, I feel that Gatti's resume is slightly better. He fought more heavy hitters and bigger names. So, taking all of these things into consideration and the brutal nature of this fight, I have to go with Arturo Thunder Gatti by a hard-fought late TKO. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think, and I will see you on the next video. Why do fans complain about fantasy fights when you have things like fantasy football, basketball, baseball, hockey? But for some reason, you have these fans who think they're too good for fantasy fights. Well, let me give you something to think about. What are we supposed to do in between fights? And what's boxing without fantasy fights? I mean, how are we going to have all of these discussions about these great fighters that have fought over the decades and not have any fantasy fights? How in the world are we going to determine who's the best without fantasy fights? Without putting Marvin Hagler in there with Roy Jones, without putting Muhammad Ali in there with Mike Tyson, without putting Lennox Lewis in there with Joe Louis, and I can go on and on. And let's just be honest, fantasy fights are just plain fun. It's just plain fun, just to think of the possibilities amongst these great fighters. When you put the best in there with the best. Now, something that's lacking with modern day boxing in an age of avoidance, ducking, is the best fighting the best. In fantasy fights, that's all you're going to get is the best fighting the best. Evander Holyfield versus Joe Frazier. What else? Ernie Shavers versus Mike Tyson. There are some great discussions that can come out of fantasy fights, comparing and contrasting, looking at the different styles, the advantages, the disadvantages, what the opponent can exploit or expose. There is just so much in a fantasy fight. And as I said before, why can other sports do it, but it's wrong in boxing? And let me just say that if there is any sport in the world that should have fantasy fights or contests, it is definitely boxing. It is definitely boxing. So everyone is entitled to their opinion. I just don't understand what certain fans have against fantasy fights, fantasy matchups. I think they're beautiful. I think they're fun. And that's why I have a whole channel dedicated to it. I love fantasy fights. Most fans love fantasy fights. It gets us to thinking. And it's educational. You can learn so much about boxing through fantasy fights. From studying the different fighters and their styles and the different things that they do. Yeah, fantasy fights are beautiful. Fantasy fights are fun. And fantasy fights aren't going anywhere. And the thing is, there is so much to talk about when we're comparing all the great legends of the different eras. It's just, I don't know what else to say about it, but at the same time, I can go on and on about it. We need fantasy fights. And you can never run out of fantasy fights. And you can do the same fantasy fights over and over from a different perspective. So those are my thoughts on fantasy fights, and I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm sure you're going to give them to me anyway. Peace. If you like the channel, please share, promote, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it.